All right, we are back with another edition of Sunday Night Astro Live. Let me just check my audio setting here. Let's see if I get the right audio. We got the let's see, external microphone built in. We're looking good there. We got the headphones built in. We got the mic volume all the way up. We are all set. Thank you for your patience tonight. I was tardy. I was tardy because I was putting together the final touches for tonight's show. And when I present tonight's show, you'll appreciate the final touches because what I did is I put together a number of sort of JPEG slides to go through how Saturn and Aries is going to affect these various generations, these astrological generations. And well, if you're between the age of, I would say, 80 and 15, tonight's show will apply to you. Although I do kind of leave out the Pluto and Virgo generation, which unfortunately seems to happen because we always seem to be left out. But Saturn and Aries, by and large, generationally, won't really affect us either. So I sort of left it out and kept it pretty straight, right? We got the last members of the silent generation, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, Gen A. We will go through all of those tonight as Saturn and Aries will impact them and their outer planets. In some cases, like with the millennials, there's a group of millennials that have Saturn and Capricorn. So this Saturn and Aries transit will impact them pretty intensely. So we'll go through all of that as well. We'll also be doing a little bit of War Watch tonight. There's a lot happening on the global stage in terms of war. And Saturn and Aries, remember, we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, and Saturn and Aries tends to be a very violent, aggressive, warlike period. And we went through that late 90s period, and we went also through 1968 when it shows up for basically 60, 67, 68, right around there, 69, like heavy duty, really, really heavy duty stuff. And I was watching a lot of Rhodesia videos today and what happened in Rhodesia, and the fighting in Rhodesia really steps up in the late 60s. So that 1968-69 period is where the Rhodesian SAS has to fight off Zamlu and what's the other one? Zamu and Zam. I always get them confused. It's Robin Mugabe and then Joshua and Como, right? Those are the two guys that have these two rebel groups that are taking on the Rhodesians because the Rhodesians want to be independent. They want to become the United States, which is ironic, right? They're going to be the first country that, since the United States, that wants its independence from England. And England says, sure, you can be independent, but you're going to have to succumb to majority rule. And the majority was not ready to rule in Rhodesia. Let's put it that way. And their leader, a guy by the name of Ian Smith, who actually had some foresight and some vision, was also an Aries. So he was a perfect leader to kind of spearhead their quest for independence. And again, that really heats up like 68, 69. Like this is when these conflicts really start. And it's fascinating to see how all of that got played out. And it was just an absolute war of attrition. And I believe the Nkomo faction was funded by the Chinese and the North Koreans, and then the Mugabe faction was funded by the Russians. And what's fascinating about that period of time, even going into the 70s and the 80s, um, there's the conflict in Rhodesia first. That happens, and then sort of simultaneously, but a little bit later, there are attacks on South Africa. Okay, so South Africa is having to deal with sort of this growing concern about apartheid, but they're also getting attacked from the western side of Africa by the Angolans. And the Angolans were backed by Russia and Cuba. And so what you had is you had this whole kind of communist swath sort of coming in and sort of, I would say forcing the regime change, but they were the muscle, right? The communists were the muscle of, let's say, in terms of England and the rest of the world not wanting Rhodesia to have its independence. The communists, both the Chinese, Red Chinese, and the Soviets, were the muscle. They're like, no, we're not going to let you do that, and we're going to essentially arm our our I would call them totem figures. Mugabe's not a totem figure. I mean, Mugabe is pretty formidable, and eventually, rises to power in what becomes Zimbabwe, and without the help of the Russians, and maybe they needed the help because he was a terrible leader. And today, Zimbabwe, the former Rhodesia, is really just an absolute mess. And but it's interesting because it all starts again sort of in that Saturn and Aries period where Rhodesia wants to become independent, and their leader Ian Smith is in Aries, and he's the one that is the spearhead for it all. And they got fucked over by the rest of the world. They got fucked over by England. They got fucked over by the United States. And the United States had just come out of a very heavy period. Like the United States was in the 70s, just as this thing in Rhodesia is starting to kind of heat up, right? The United States is still very embroiled in Vietnam in 1968. Of course, Saturn and Aries had the Tet Offensive, the Great Tet Offensive, one of the legendary assaults in the history of military and warfare. So by the time the 70s roll around, and this thing in Rhodesia is really heating up, and the thing in Angola with South Africa is heating up. You've got Gerald Ford and then Jimmy Carter as president, and they don't want any kind of legacy that's related to war, right? Like Carter does not want to help the Rhodesians. Now, what happens is that the CIA gets involved, and they get involved in Angola, and they actually are working with the South Africans in Angola, but they're not equipped, right? The South Africans and even the CIA is not equipped to deal with the number of Cuban soldiers and the armaments that are being brought in from the Soviet Union. So it was a total mismatch. And then when the real fighting started to happen, because what happened with Angola is there was like northern Angola and southern Angola, and southern Angola was fighting for its own sovereignty. They didn't want to become part of northern Angola, which was more than happy to become communist, right? So basically, South Africa and the CIA were fighting for the southern Angolans. South Africa was also fighting to secure its own border. And then when the fighting got really intense and hot, the southern Angolans just got up and ran to the other side and joined the other side. So it was like the CIA guys like, what the fuck are we fighting for? If these people don't won't even fight for their own freedom, for their own sovereignty. And it didn't really go well. Let's put it that way in Angola. But so Saturn in Aries has this connection to violence and war, and we're going to see, stuff with, I would not be surprised if we see more stuff domestically with guns. Like right now, I'm looking at a story that there was an attack that happened at the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder, Colorado, uh, which I used to read tarot cards at back in the day when I was on the road doing tarot card readings. And let me just see this. So an attack has just occurred on a pro-Israel protest. Oh, here we go. This is interesting. Let's take a look at this. This is all Saturn and Aries stuff, right? This is Saturn and Aries. We got Chiron and Aries still happening, and let's check this out. This is right in the wheelhouse, as they say. Let's see what we got here. This is just breaking, and we know that a lot of these events. I think, in fact, I think the shooting that just happened in Washington recently was a little fishy, if you ask me. Okay, so let's just check this out. This is almost happening real time. Pearl Street Mall, Boulder, Colorado. It is a pro-Israel protest, and it looks like it might have gotten a little spicy. Here we go.
Stay.
I'm seeing lots of smoke. Somebody's lying down. What's going on there? I don't know. That guy doesn't seem too. He doesn't seem too threatened, does he? No, not really. Let's see her shin hit.
Stay.
Can you not see this? Here, let me bring it back. Hold on. I have to can it. Hold on. I always do. This always happens with the first fucking screen share. There we go. I'll bring it back again. So again, this is Pearl Street Mall, Boulder, Colorado. There's I guess, a pro-Israel demonstration. Lots of smoke. It's like a lot of old hippie protesters. You got some people on the ground there, but then this guy doesn't really seem all that bothered by it, does he? He's like, man, this is just harshing my scene. Looks like something might have happened to her shin. I don't know. Anyway, there you go. That's a little breaking action there from Boulder, Colorado. And it says the FBI and law enforcement report that they are responding to a possible terror attack targeting Israeli supporters in Boulder, Colorado. Bystanders report that some kind of incendiary device was thrown by a group. Let's just see, we got more on this here. By an unidentified male, setting several of them on fire and resulting in serious burns. The suspect appears to have been detained and arrested by police. So here's another view of it. So it looks like he might have thrown probably some kind of an M80 or something like that in there. Who knows? Let's see what we have here. This is Boulder's finest detaining the terror suspect right here. I don't know. Backpack guy doesn't seem too worried. Then again, backpack guy's probably seen a few things in his lifetime. Okay. Yeah, I kind of wanted to just sort of, at the beginning here, just go through some of this kind of war violence. I want to just devote a little bit of attention to this at the beginning of these shows with Saturn and Aries. Okay, so now what do we have here? We have a what is this? What is this? What do we got here? Let me see. Let me just preview this. I haven't seen this yet. It's an Infowars thing, so I'm going to stay away from that right now. Alex is sometimes a little hypey. He is a little hypey. We have an escalation on the Russian war front. We know that's happening. Um, let's see. What else do we have here? Just in terms of Saturn and Aries stuff. Here's something that's really interesting. And this is not Saturn and Aries, but this is definitely Gemini territory. Like really weird, high strange Gemini territory. And I don't know if you guys saw this. Um, but here's some more on the Boulder terror attack. Hold on. Let me see if I can bring this up. Okay, so here we go. They've already got the news on this. It's amazing how fast it happens. It almost feels like they have, well, maybe created the news by how quickly we know what's going on here. Boulder terror witnesses say suspect tried to torch victims. It was planned. He had an accent. This is the guy right here. Okay, let's get into this. The terror that gripped Boulder, Colorado, this was yesterday, wasn't just an isolated act of violence. It was a calculated attack on innocent lives. Witnesses to the Molotov cocktail assault on pro-Israel protesters, including children, have come forward with chilling details. If you're pro-Israel, why would you want to protest? I'm just curious. Why would you want to protest? What are you protesting? Well, I'm not sure what you're protesting. Your country gets billions and billions of dollars from the United States every year. Those are loans that are not repayable. They're not even loans. They're just huge sums of money that come from the United States. Every single congressman and more than likely senator in Washington, D.C. has an APAC person who looks after Israel's affairs with each and every one of them, except for Thomas Massey. You have the most pro-Israel president probably in the history of this country. What and more laws that are connected to speech as it relates to anti-Semitism on campuses, deporting people, shutting down funding to campuses that support quote unquote hate speech or terror. Here in this state, Greg Abbott has made Israel his number one priority. What are they? I don't understand. What are they protesting against? I find it really odd that this is a group of people who have found something to protest against. And I'm not here to offend uh, any American Jewish people, but you're protesting for Israel, and it seems to me like Israel's getting a pretty good deal. I'm not sure what the protest is about. Anyway, let's read on. Okay, so his name is Mohammed Solomon. Okay, does that look like a Mohammed Solomon? I don't know. Maybe Mohammed Solomon's look like that. To me, he looks like a fucking Fed or something like that, right? Mohammed Solomon. If you wanted to create some, I don't know, maybe he's real. I don't know. Maybe this is a real dude. But look at the name, Solomon. Like he's a solo man. It's just him, right? There's nobody else but him. He's the only guy. He's the lone Molotov cocktailer. Didn't just throw firebombs, he tried to torch victims, shouting threats with an accent that betrayed his intent. Who writes this stuff, by the way? That betrayed his intent. So if he didn't have an accent, would his intent be betrayed if he spoke just regular English? Like, who writes this shit? An accent that betrayed. It was planned, one witness said. Their voice. Look, if something bad happened and this guy was really terrorizing people, I don't want to make fun of what happened. Okay, I don't want to make fun of what happened. But on the other hand, I've grown a little cynical. I think many of you have as well. Their voice trembling. He had an accent. This is a stark reminder of the dangers they've long warned about, and the swift justice that followed is a testament to a system finally waking up. One of the witnesses mentioned he had a short list. Oh, he didn't have a manifesto, but he had a short list. Let's hear what this witness had to say.
There's a woman who was on the ground bleeding out. Oh my gosh, sorry. And then there are two other women whose calves were burned from the fire. And so I just ran over to stay with them and make sure that they didn't lose too much blood from their legs.
And there was a woman that was burning on the ground. And then we noticed two other people that had also been affected by the burns on their legs. And this man was shirtless and was yelling with some kind of accent and was threatening to burn people.
That's very Aries, isn't it? Fire, sulfur. The attack occurred during a vigil for Israeli hostages. This is why they're protesting. A gathering meant to show solidarity with a nation under siege. But what should have been a moment of peace turned into a nightmare. Solomon, dressed as a landscaper to blend in. Oh, he's clever. Pretended to observe before unleashing his assault. The footage, which has gone viral with over 2 million views, shows the chaos, smoke, screams, and community in shock. Witnesses describe Solomon's actions as deliberate, his threats laced with an accent that suggested a foreign ideology. How the fuck do you determine that? What does even a foreign ideology mean? A foreign ideology. What if he's Malaysian? Like, don't Malaysians have foreign ideologies? A foreign ideology. If you're from, I don't know. If you're from Alabama, right? If you're from Alabama and you're in Boulder, I'm trying to find like a kind of a redneck place in America. We'll go with Alabama. If you're from Alabama and you're in Boulder, that's a foreign ideology. Okay? That is a foreign idea. Anything outside of the liberal mindset that has completely turned Boulder into a most unlivable place unless you are a liberal, that is a foreign ideology. You don't have to be from some other part of the world. You can be from Alabama. It's about a rising tide of anti-Semitism in America, a trend that's escalated since the Israel-Hamas conflict began in October. The FBI's response was immediate. Director Kash Patel labeled it a targeted terror attack, a classification that carries weight. Agents were on the scene within hours, and Solomon, remember Solo Man, now faces terrorism charges. This decisive action contrasts sharply with the Boulder Police Department's initial reluctance to call it terrorism, a hesitation that has sparked outrage among conservatives. For Trump's administration, this is vindication of their hardline stance on domestic terrorism. Okay, so domestic terrorism, in case you haven't noticed, doesn't extend itself to, let's say, Oh, I don't know, Carmelo Anthony, right? Why would Carmelo Anthony not be subjected to domestic terrorism or a hate crime, right? So is domestic terrorism only subjected to people here in the United States who may or may not be from the United States, who inflict some kind of terror on a particular group, and that particular group seems to be the one that is being attacked here, theoretically, in this event. So clearly, this is a website that is building a case that more and more anti-Semitic attacks are being perpetrated upon American Jews. So again, here we are, Saturn, Aries, Chiron in Aries, and we have an event that's happened in Boulder. All right, let's see if there's anything else happening on the world. Oh, you know what? There's another thing that was really interesting that happened. We're going to get into the big stuff here. I'm going to check in with Chattari in a second. Trump said something that was really bizarre, but kind of on point for the time that we're in right now. And I'm going to show this to you. A lot of you guys have seen this, but he posted this on Truth Social, and this really gets into some heavy Gemini symbolism. Now, check this out. This is Trump. It says President Trump shares a link to a post, not a retruth, that Joe Biden was executed in 2020. The post continues, Biden clones and doubles and robotic engineered soulless mindless entities are what you see. Okay? This is from the Donald. Let me play this here. Let me expand this. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to play it from the beginning. There is no Joe Biden executed in 2020. Look at this. Those are all the hashtags there. Leave it to Donald Trump with Sun in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini, bringing up the prospect that Joe Biden was killed in 2020 and replaced by a series of clones. And as I talked about, was it last week, or I think I talked about it on sometime last week. I talked about Russia and the whole synthetic robotoid phenomenon, and that's what Trump. This is what Trump is. Would it be ironic if Trump was one of them too, and he was like outing like what if Trump? I would not be surprised, by the way, if Trump had synthetic robotoids and clones of Trump. I would not be surprised at all. The only difference is maybe that there still is a real Trump, unlike Biden. And I think we could all agree that whatever we were witnessing with Biden didn't seem like Biden at all. You know, there were all these strange anomalies. Either the mask didn't fit right, or you know, there were parts of Biden's body that seemed like it was almost green screened, right? Like they wouldn't blend right away, or they wouldn't blend easy into from the foreground to the background. It was like you could almost see through them. There was, you know, there were all these strange anomalies with Biden, and I do think that they used like a variety of whatever they had on hand, whether it was actors with latex masks or clones or robots or whatever. It's like we're gonna run this guy or run a reason, and he didn't even always look the same either, right? Like the ears were different, eye colors were. I mean, it was like the greatest fucking hoax perpetrated on the American people, hidden in plain sight. Most of us knew. Like we all made jokes about it. We used to call him Clone Biden. Yeah, so it's not like there wasn't, a number of us who weren't aware of the fact that this motherfucker wasn't real. And everything was being run by Obama and Susan Rice and Val Jarrett and Samantha Power. Like all those people were basically running the Biden administration. And then I think somewhere there was a shift in power, and those people kind of lost control of the Biden presidency. And I think the last year of the Biden presidency, it was being run by Hunter, Jill, and her professional husband. Those three people, I think, were running the Biden presidency. That somehow there was this power. This is just my take, my sense. There was a power struggle that was kind of going on with Obama and sort of the team in the basement, and I think that the idea that Joe was going to run again for president or whatever Joe was, right? Anthony Bernal was the third party. That was Jill Biden's like professional husband. So they wanted another 4 years of the facade. And I think that Biden and Jarrett and Rice and all those people knew that they probably couldn't pull that off for another 4 years. Like that was just not sustainable. And I don't think they really wanted Kamala Harris either. I think they wanted somebody else to run for president. I don't know who they wanted, but I think when probably somewhere at the beginning of 2020, there was this power shift that happened. And that's when, of course, Biden was going to have to start to run for president. And I think that's when Jill and Bernal and Hunter started to take over and weren't essentially taking orders from, the president in the basement. So, yeah, but we all knew, like it's in the audacity of the Bidens and Anthony Bernal thinking that they could somehow squeeze out another 4 years of whatever combination of Joe Biden they could put together was absolutely arrogant and preposterous. And of course they were set up to, make him look like a fool or whoever or whatever that was. Now, it's a big difference saying that Biden was killed in 2020 versus Biden was still around, but they would have to hop him up on essentially speed and B vitamins or whatever cocktails. That's a really big difference between the two. I don't really have a problem with them, with Biden being gone in 2020. But then you have to ask yourself, like, what the hell is going on with Hunter Biden and Jill and, well, I know Anthony Bernal wouldn't give a shit. You have to ask yourself, what is going on with these people, right? Like, how could they just continue to have this facade about everything? It's really strange. But I think a lot of these people are kind of soulless anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I think but Trump bringing this up with we're in Gemini season. We're kind of at the height of Jupiter in Gemini before it transits into or ingresses into Cancer. We're coming up very quickly on Uranus in Gemini. So a lot of this weird Gemini stuff is going to pop up. And even events that look like terror events, they're very Gemini-like because what they do is they create um, sort of a simulacra of a certain reality, like a staged reality. And we don't really know. We don't really know what happened in Boulder. Like the police are trying to figure out, is this a terror attack? Like what really went on here? Like to what degree were these women's legs burned? Like we don't really know, right? And what's interesting is that Boulder, Colorado, um, is such a liberal bastion that I don't think they would hesitate to like pin somebody to the wall and say, "Oh yeah, this was a terror attack." I don't think they would hesitate. So I don't know. There's something that's, and even the name Mohammed Solomon, and he had a his foreign accent betrayed his intent. It's just fucking ridiculous. Just because he had a foreign accent, like somebody who sounds like they may be like. Have you ever listened? Like those people who were being interviewed, or the person who wrote that story. Have you ever listened to somebody from Israel who speaks rough English? They sound like they have a foreign accent. Now, I'm not saying that shirtless guy is Israeli, but Israelis sound like they have a foreign accent. So any accent could be used, I suppose. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So this really gets into like a lot of propaganda, and this gets also into like Uranus and Gemini territory, where you could have all these websites and avatars and people set up, and it's sort of like industry plants, but to the nth degree. Like it's going to be very, very difficult to know if you're reading a website, because they can curate a website very quickly now with AI, like incredibly quickly. You could come up with 30 or 40 articles. And with a website, if you've never run or owned your own website, one of the things that you can do is you can post date articles. Like you could have articles go in, you can change the calendar on the date, so it would appear that that article would have come up 6 months ago, 8 months ago. It's not difficult. You can post date articles. So it'd be very easy to create a website, have AI create the majority of the stories, to craft the stories to whatever kind of intent that the owner of the website would want. In this case, we're talking political. It can go either way. Like it could go either way, but we'll go down the path that we've been going down. And they could post date stuff, and then they could make it look like they're a legitimate website, and they've been around for a while. And you would have to look and go into like their Linksys or whatever it is, and then find out that, oh, well, they've only really been around for a year. Well, how did they get these articles that were 2 or 3 years old? Right. So you'd have to do sort of next layer research with it. But I think we're going to see a ton of these. We're going to see a ton of these. We're going to see people pop up out of nowhere, kind of a little bit like Ian Carroll, although similar but different. And it's going to be very difficult to know if these people are real. It's going to become increasingly more difficult to sort of peg somebody. Say, oh yeah, that person's real. That person. That, for now, there's things that you can look for with AI. You go, oh yeah, that's kind of AI. I can kind of see that. It's going to get harder and harder and harder as the computing power, computing speed, and they start to unleash these really finely detailed AIs. And good luck. right? Good luck. And the way that this thing could really spin out of control is, God forbid, you know, somebody, well, maybe like myself or like yourself, right? And all of a sudden, there's another version of you out there that are saying things. I'm going to just say doing things, but saying things that could be like, you know, like really fucking hateful, right? Or really incendiary. Like this is bound to happen. This is bound to happen. And I think that when it does happen, there's going to have to be some kind of protocol. It goes along with digital ID that shows that you are a real person. So, for instance, if I were to do this podcast in the future, just to make sure that there were no other kind of versions of me saying or doing things that would be either contrary to my belief system or could put me in a situation that was less than desirable, right? There would have to be some kind of a digital, like, watermark, something that would be associated with me and only me, so that whatever other image or film or video would pop up and it did not have that very specific thing, you would know that it wasn't me or it wasn't you, right? But in order to get that, in order to get validated, in order to get certified, like this is what happens on Twitter all the time. They keep asking me to get verified. I don't really want to be verified. I don't want to be verified. I'm okay with being able to write 50 words or less. I don't need to be verified to push my tweets. Whoever's going to see them is going to see them. But this whole idea of being verified and validated is probably going to be not a luxury, but it will be essential, because it will be the only way that you will be able to distinguish yourself from any other versions of you that somebody might cook up and turn loose on the internet. And it's a scary proposition, but it's a way for also people to, it's almost like it's almost like extortion, right? We're gonna put all these versions of you out there that are going to uh, damn your character, damn your reputation, and the only way that you can stop it from happening is to be verified and validated. And there's something about that biometrically you've got to make some kind of deal with, right? You've got, it's like the guys that would come along and, back in Little Italy, knock your store around and break windows and steal shit, and then come by the next day and say, "Hey, that was really pretty bad what happened. You need some people like us to look after you." Of course, they're the people that did it. You know the story, right? I feel like that's what's going to happen. And people are going to be terrified that some version of them is going to be doing something that is completely counter to who they are. And it could absolutely ruin their reputation and their lives overnight. So a lot of people will beg to have some kind of thing that says, "Well, I've got this thing. See, I got this thing, and it didn't have that thing. So it can't be me." But there's a price to pay for that thing, whatever that thing is. All right, let's see how many people we have here. 265, right? We're cooking pretty good. All right, why don't we get into the chart of the moment, and then we'll begin to veer into tonight's topic, which is Saturn and Aries and how it's going to affect all these different generations. By the way, I am going to be at the Bridge Conference, and that is happening, I believe, on, was that the date here correctly. Bring up my calendar, which I have to do. Let's see. It's going to be on the 17th, 18th, and 19th of October. And that is in Frisco, Texas. And it's put on by a group called Team Light, Lighthe. I'll be there with David. And we'll be closing the event on Sunday night. I don't know if we're going to stream that live. I don't know what that's going to look like. But David and I are going to close that event, and there's going to be other speakers that are going to be there as well. Of course, David's going to DJ on Saturday night. And if you haven't seen David DJ, it's well worth the price because he's a fantastic DJ, and I'm sure everybody will have an ecstatic experience around that. So in the show notes, there is a link to sign up. If you sign up through that link, you're going to get 50% off for the conference, for the early sign up. So I would urge you to take advantage of that 50%. I also think that this conference might sell out. That's my sense. Now, I'm not telling you that so you get all feared and everything, but I feel like it's going to be a pretty big draw. And I'll tell you why, because there's a lot of people in that Dallas, Fort Worth, Waco, even if you cross over the border and you get into like what's the next, is it Tulsa? It feels to me like there's a lot of people in that area alone who are going to be really interested in attending. I mean, that's just like the local area. And I know this because there's a lot of people from that area that watch this show and are clients and members of Chaptaria. And that's just my world, right? And I know that David's got people that follow him in that area. Of course, there's other people that are part of this event. So I think it's gonna be very well attended. And so I would get in on the early. If that was me, I'd get in on the early. Okay, so that's all in the show notes. So let's do this. We are June 1st, the first day of June. How about that? Happy birthday to all you Geminis out there. What time is it? 8:13. Happy birthday to you and you. Okay, here we go. If you haven't discovered Mario's podcast for symbolic studies, he does a podcast where they kind of go over a sign every month, and people call in and leave their kind of messages. He just did one on Gemini, and let's see. Let me find out here if I can. Yeah, it's right here. This is cool. So I'm going to put this in the chat. Let's see. Okay. He's got some. This is on Spotify. So if you're a Spotify person, I'm going to put this in the chat. And this is symbolic studies, and Mario does this once a month. So I'm going to put this in chat right here. And Mario he's absolutely great. There's that. There you go. And I guess there's another one for Apple. If you guys are an Apple podcast group, and I'll put that in there as well, so you guys can check it out. So there's a bunch of people that leave their messages on the astrological sign that Mario and his lovely wife are covering. There you go. All right. Okay, so let me get back into the chart of the moment here. Let's take a look at this. Let's see what we got going here. By the way, congratulations to the Indiana Pacers, who it's a very interesting NBA Finals where you have Indiana versus Oklahoma City. It's like Middle America. You know, it's fascinating. You don't have New York and everything that goes along with New York, including eyeballs, a lot of eyeballs. There's no LA, there's no LeBron, there's no Luca, and I can kind of see like some Saturn and Aries symbolism around these two teams from Middle America. When I think of Aries, you know, I think of sort of like the Rust Belt, you know, like the Rust Belt, like the Mid East, Midwest. You know, I think of when Oklahoma, you've got like a lot of oil and drilling in Oklahoma. You know, there's roughnecks in Oklahoma, and it feels very Aries-like in some ways. It's like it's the everyman. You know, this is not an Aquarian series. It's not coastal. It's not, you know, it's not Silicon Valley and the Golden State Warriors. This is kind of, you know, these meat and potato cities. And what's interesting about, I would say, both teams is that they're both really young. Like if you look at Oklahoma City, I mean, most of the guys on that team are 26 and under, which is really insane when you look at the talent that they have. And the same thing is pretty much true for Indiana. Like they're a team that's filled with a lot of young players. I would say, you know, 27. And I'm trying to think of an older guy, and maybe Miles Turner, but he's not that old. He's like 25. And when I think of Aries, I think of young, right? It's sort of, it's, you know, it's the springtime of humanity. Aries, literally, it's the springtime of humanity. And these teams that have these older players, like Golden State and Steph Curry, God bless him, I love Steph, right? But he's not in Aries season. You know, he's older. LeBron James is older. He's not in Aries season either. And so you have these two very young teams, very Aries-like and very kind of Middle America, sort of hashing it out here in the NBA Finals. It's going to be really interesting, just in terms of ratings. And I actually think it's really, really good that that these two teams are in the finals. Why not? Right? Let Oklahoma City get a little shine. Let Indianapolis get a little shine. It also feels very Trump-like in some ways too. Like just in some ways, it's like a victory for Middle America. It's like this victory for, I don't want to say MAGA per se, but it's this victory because the other options could have been New York, and we know that that Trump is from New York, and there are New Yorkers that, you know, fucking can't stand the woke paradigm. But it's also been the heart of this very kind of socially liberal experiment for a very long time. And then the other option could have been Minnesota. And, you know, that's where Tim Walz is from. And that's where they had the George Floyd riots. And which is ironic because when you watch the Minnesota Timberwolves fan base and you look in their auditorium, it's the Target Center, they're all fucking white. I have never seen a whiter audience in my life than the Minnesota Timberwolves. Maybe the Utah Jazz. I think maybe the Utah Jazz might even be darker than the Minnesota Timberwolves. Like I'm just sitting around looking at the stand, like, oh my God, there's white people. And then they're all wearing white shirts. It's like those people won't burn the city down. But anyway, it could have looked like that, right? It could have looked like Minnesota, which has become this bastion of liberalism, even though But it's not mutually exclusive. You can be a white and a liberal. And then New York, which has been this social liberal experiment for all these years, but it's not, right? We have these two teams that are part of the heartland, part of the kind of the Dust Belt, which Oklahoma was, and the Rust Belt, Indiana, and they're hashing it out for an NBA title. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of an affirmation of this middle America sort of expression of, blue collar. Like those are blue collar towns. Indianapolis and Oklahoma City are blue collar towns. Now, whether or not we're a blue collar country all over again, that's a whole other story. But I think symbolically, it's really interesting. Okay, so let's go in here and look. A little more. Okay, here we go. Do some share screen. We'll get into that, and then I'm going to go to. By the way, Julie Sunshine, if you're still here, I'm going to talk to Chris and see if we can hook you up. I thought we'd done that, but I don't know. We'll see if we can hook you up with a goodie bag so you can get it. Okay, here we go. There's our sun at 11 Gemini. So we've moved into second decan Gemini. Which is perfect because it's showing up in the 7th house, and that's the Libra and decan. And it feels to me like, the next 9 degrees of Gemini is about relating. It's about relating and how you relate to the other. You can see that right off the bat. Even Mercury is in that second decan. So I think it's good. I like it. The sun is still in a wide trine with Pluto, even though Pluto is retrograding. And just, we're dealing with a lot of communication, right? At least, and in being in this decan, not just this house, but in this decan, it's connected to partnership. And, everybody hates like the word sharing and processing, like so fucking, 2000s or 1990s. But there is something really vital about having good conversation amongst your partners, whoever they may be, whether it's your life partner, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, partnership. It's really important to have good conversation and stimulating conversation and conversation that can ask a tough question every now and then, right? But also can provide an interesting perspective that the other can't. And that's really where Gemini comes in, because Gemini and Libra are very similar in some ways, except Libra is externalizing the self to the other, whereas Gemini is internalizing the self to the self. So so Gemini's got a much more internal kind of system going on, right? Like Geminis are a trip. Let's just call it as we see it. They're a trip because they have the ability to literally switch personas, right? Literally, they can switch a persona, and they don't have any problem switching personas. They're very fluid, and Gemini kind of shapeshifts, right? Sort of like John Hinckley, like John Hinckley is a Gemini, and he theoretically has this violent side and eventually, theoretically put some slugs in Reagan and Jim Brady, right? But he's also like really kind of gentle, like John Hinckley never really displays hard aggression. Yes, he got kicked out of the Nazi party, but it's not because he was aggressive. I think he just had ideas that were even beyond that. And I'm not saying that we excuse his ideas, but they were just ideas. But that's how Gemini can work. Like they can, they can have this one side of who they are presented to the world, and then there's this other side, and they can come forward, and they can have multiple sides. I mean, Gemini is really fascinating that way, and it's like, sort of like if you've ever been in a relationship with Gemini, have fun because you never know who's going to show up, right? You never know. And sometimes it's cool. It's like, oh, this is fun. This is interesting. And other times it's like, oh my God, this fucking person is fucking schizophrenic, right? But there's never a dull moment with the Gemini. Wasn't there a record called There's Never a Dull Moment with the Schizophrenic too? Anyway, but when we get into this Libran decan, Libra is always trying to understand itself through the other. Always. Whether it's relationship, whether it's through conversation, whether it's through some form of social bonding, it's always about understanding who they are through the other. So when we have the Sun and Mercury in this decan, the internal Gemini focus becomes more externalized, right? It becomes part of that Libran style of trying to understand and relate to and through the other. And then the final decan of Gemini, when it gets to 20, it moves into the Aquarian decan, where Gemini tries to understand itself amongst the social milieu. And how does it fit in with the group or the organization or sort of the world at large in a lot of ways? So this is a time with the Sun and Mercury in conjunction where there's going to be a lot of talk, a lot of chatter, a lot of conversation. Conversation is good for relationship. And I think that, until we have some kind of major movement with, like where are some of the other planets going? I think the Sun will be out of Gemini by the time Mars goes into Virgo. So I don't think we're going to be dealing with that hard Mars Sun square. By that time, the Sun will be in Cancer. So what's it, Mars at 21? It's going to be close. Let me just check here. Since I am a professional astrologer, I need to make sure that my astrology is correct, or else I'm not doing my job. All right, so let's look at that. Okay, so we got the Sun in Cancer, and that's on. Let's see, we got it this year. It's on the 22nd. Of course, it's the summer solstice, and lo and behold, Mars is in Virgo at 2 degrees. So we're not gonna get that. Yeah, ain't gonna happen. Ain't gonna happen. So my point being is that this whole Gemini flow is going to be pretty unobstructed, and which I think is good. I think it's good. I think a lot of really essential communication can take place. Now Jupiter is already in that Aquarian decan, and of course it's been scoring Saturn for a long time now. And then tonight we are in the final degree of this Leo moon. Right? Did everybody get over that moon transit through Cancer, where it was squaring Neptune initially? Did you guys get through that? And the squares with Chiron and Venus. I'd say the last 48 hours with the moon have been pretty pleasant, actually. I mean, in my life, it's been pretty pleasant. So tomorrow, when you guys get up, it's the moon in Virgo on Monday. How fun is that? You get to roll up your sleeves. Now here we go. Here we get a little tension with the moon moving into Virgo and starting the squaring off of the Sun and Mercury. Okay, so that is a little tense. Yeah, let me just get into this a little bit. Probably somewhere around tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, clearly going into Tuesday morning. Beware of criticism. beware of criticism. I think the moon in Virgo on a Monday can either be really good and businesslike, or it's like, fuck, I'm not ready for this. I am just not ready. Even when the moon goes into Virgo, it's still going to be squaring Uranus. I sense some resistance here. Definitely some resistance. And then the moon is going to be in conjunct with Saturn. That's happening right now, going into later tonight, and probably tomorrow when it gets up to about 3 degrees roughly. Yeah. Let's take a look at that. I would say that, like, in terms of the workplace, to me, this is like taking the fall for somebody else, right? This is, to me, Saturn's like management. We get this moon in Virgo in conjunct Saturn, and it almost feels like management wants to put the blame on people's shoulders with this moon in conjunct with Saturn. And then, of course, we've got the squaring of uh, the sun in Gemini. So there, okay, I'll give you one time. I was in college. This is my example of this. I was in junior college, and I used to have this fairly unhealthy habit of getting high before I went to school, and I would drive to college, and of course, my car would become just a cannabis den. And so by the time I got to school, I was pretty baked. And I had this English class, and the English teacher liked me. He liked me because I was good with discussion and creative. I think it was about maybe 19. And he's talking, and I started yawning because I was tired and I was high. And this guy behind me, I think he might have yawned once, because when somebody's yawning, like, you wind up yawning. I think he might have yawned, and the teacher fucking yelled at him. Right? It's like I'm sorry that this guy caught the heat. I feel bad about it. But the teacher was pissed at me, but he couldn't yell at me because he liked him. So he yelled at the guy behind me. The guy behind me, what was his name? His name was Ron something. And he complained that I was the one that was yawning, and why wasn't he yelling at me? And the teacher wouldn't hear any of it. And I felt bad for the guy, right? But this is what I'm talking about right here. This is like the moon moving into this in conjunct position with Saturn and squaring off, beginning to square off against Sun, Mercury. And it's sort of like this, no, it's not your fault, right? It's actually somebody else's fault. And you're actually taking the blame for it, right? Don't take the blame for it. Do not take the blame for it. I think with the moon, sun square, moon, Mercury square, you might be able to talk through things, right? Because it is in the sun. If this happens to you, if this happens to happen to you, right, and you have to take the blame for somebody else's shit, you can talk through it. Don't wear the goat horns. Okay. By the way, goat used to mean something very, very different in the past. Do not wear the goat horns. From a bigger perspective, I think health is really on the table here, right? We're starting to hear more about this new strand of COVID that's coming from China, right? And it feels to me like with this moon in Virgo and this in conjunct with Saturn, Saturn and Aries wanted to reestablish kind of a dominant narrative. Like, I feel like we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to these bogus health crises that we could be staring down over the next 48 hours. And again, people are kind of activated, like all these sleeper cells, truth tellers have been activated. And the the problematic part is that if they're I'm not convinced, first of all, that it's all about like terrain. I think terrain is a big part of it. But I'm not convinced that there aren't viruses and aren't bacteria that are harmful. I don't claim to know everything, right? But there is something that does feel very communicable that if you're around somebody, especially like people that are shedding now, if you're around them, you're going to wind up having some things happen to you that you may not want to happen to you. And we have known a number of people who unfortunately have had that and they are no longer with us. So there is something that is transmissible, whether it's the shedding or the nanotech or the whatever it is, right? And I'm not even talking about from the last batch of injections that went around, but there is something that if we are in a proximity of certain people, like when your kids get sick, a lot of times as a parent, I don't know if you're being sympathetic, but you wind up getting sick. There's something there. I'm not sure if it's exactly how science breaks it down. I'm somewhere between like the biome thing, but also I don't know, there's something there, right? And I think we have to be careful um, because we went through, there was something happening to people during COVID. Let's be clear about this. And it wasn't just people getting zapped. There were people that were getting very, very sick. Now, was it because they were getting sick because of 5G? Were they getting sick because um, they had contact with mRNA that somebody had spread somewhere on some elevator panel that they punched buttons on? Like there were people that did get sick. And in November of 2019, before it all happened, I got really sick. I was sick for like 3 fucking weeks. I really haven't been sick since then. But what was interesting about that is even though I was really sick, my mother didn't get sick. And that's when I was back in California. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that don't take things lightly, right? Don't take things lightly. Oh, well, that last thing was just bullshit. And, we know you're just peddling bullshit. You want us to just, take the next series of injections. It would be sort of like the powers that were to unleash something that was, I don't know, something that would get your attention. Let's put it that way. So I guess what I'm saying is don't get too cocky. Don't get too cocky. But also don't be a slave to fear. And I feel like that this moon in Virgo coming in, this in conjunction, and then the ultimate squaring up with the Sun and Mercury has a bit of that. Has a bit of that kind of that moon in Virgo sort of paranoia. That there's something amiss. There's something in the air, and so just keep an eye on it. We'll just watch this over the next 72 hours and see if anything evolves out of it. Because I think there is a possibility, especially with that Saturn in conjunct, and ultimately wanting to bring people back into some kind of a control grid. Venus is still squaring Pluto, and boy, that is going to be in that square until it gets about 8, 9, 10 Taurus right there, and it's right at the. I mean, it is right at the edge, right at the edge of Aries. So we've got probably about another 15 degrees of this Pluto square. And when it goes into Taurus, that's a hard square, right? That is a hard square, Venus Pluto. To me, that feels This is not just the United States. This is the world, right? Venus Pluto square. That's the economy. That's heavy, heavy economic news coming down the pipeline. That's how I'm seeing this. Of course, there's the interpersonal stuff, but hmm. I think we're going to have a lot of conversations over the next couple of weeks about precious metals, silver, gold. I'm starting to get a little concerned about paper money. There have been 2 weekends in a row when I went to go to the instant teller, the ATM. This is Wells Fargo, and the town that I live in only has one Wells Fargo branch. It's pretty big. It's a pretty big branch. And I went in last weekend to get money out of the ATM, and it was not dishing out any money. And it's not the first time that it's done that. All right. So my option at the time was to go into the drive-through, which was open, or just skip it altogether, which I wound up doing. And I think we're going to experience more of these ATMs not having or distributing money at certain times. And that's going to start to spook people a little bit. People are going to start to wonder, how often is this going to occur? Right? Like one time, it's kind of an inconvenience, right? But if it starts to happen more frequently, it moves out of the inconvenience territory. It moves into something where it's like, maybe I should be concerned about this. And I feel like with Venus moving into Taurus, we got that square with Pluto, and that Pluto's retrograde. I think people are going to start thinking about cash and how they can have a bit more cash. I also feel like we should be paying attention to kind of where cash transactions are going, or in this case, not going with that Venus Pluto square. So let's keep an eye on that over the course of the next week or so, and see if we get some feedback in that territory. A lot of fire in the air, right? So there's a lot of emotion, intensity, passion, feeling, right? Not a lot of Earth. We have Uranus, and that's about it planetarily. The moon will move it to Virgo, so we'll get some more Earth. We got a fair amount of air and some water, not a ton of water right now. I mean, let's just pay attention to that. We got the true node in Pisces, okay. Saturn and Neptune, they're out of Pisces now. They're in fire. They're in Fire City. We have Vesta and we have Juno, the two asteroids. They're in water, but they're also retrograde. So there's not a lot of water. So when we have a lot of fire and we have a fair amount of air, what do we have? We have an explosive. We have an explosive environment. We have an explosive atmosphere. Clearly, Boulder, Colorado is pretty explosive, apparently. Okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't we make a shift here, and let's talk about the big subject, the big topic of the night. What's on the thumbnail, and that is Saturn in Aries going through these various generations. But before I do, I have to give my love to a friend Chris over here at True Hemp Science, and they passed SB3 here in Texas, which means that Chris and other CBD purveyors who do have certain trace elements of THC in their products and use them quite well, by the way, they're not going to be able to use those trace elements of THC. And it's really kind of fucked up because there are close to 50,000 people that are employed in the CBD business here in the state of Texas. I believe there are close to 8,000 independent operators, and all of their jobs and their income and what they pour back into the community are at risk of going away. And all Greg Abbott has to do is just sign SB3 since it passed. And it's unfortunate because the people that are behind getting rid of CBD or pro-synthetic THC. That's a whole other story. But if you go to True Hemp Science, you can get some of the best CBD products you can find. And if you spend $100 or more and type in 15MINS, you will get a goodie bag. It's like the Whitman sampler. You'll get probably some of the gummies. You might get a couple of vials of some of the tinctures go along with it. Small vials, by the way. And it's like a sampler. And it's a really, really nice addition to your order. And again, we don't know how long our friend Chris is going to be able to stay in business. So he'd probably appreciate you buying a lot of his product just so that he can go out with a bang if indeed he does have to close up shop. If there's any deals moving forward, I will definitely keep all of you apprised. TrueHempScience.com. And don't forget 15MINS. Okay. Let's talk about these generations. And I made some graphics. So if you've waited around this long, congratulations, we are going to get into it. Okay, Saturn in Aries is, anytime Saturn changes signs, it is really significant. And it has a personal effect, but it also affects these generations where people have like certain qualities that or certain astrological aspects that will be impacted by this Saturn transit. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through all of them, and I'm going to break down how this Saturn ingress into Aries is going to affect all the generations that are on the planet right now. Okay, so I'm going to start with the silent generation, and there are still people from the silent generation that are still around. And they are in their late 80s and 90s. Okay. Pluto, usually we determine terms like the boomers or Gen X or millennials. Usually we determine them by the position of Pluto, give or take a couple of years, right? Pluto actually shows up in Leo for the first time in 1939, okay? And then it retrogrades back into Cancer and comes back again. And so we really don't fully get into Pluto and Leo until around 1942, all right? I wouldn't really consider those people part of the baby boomers because World War II is still going on. So even though Pluto is in Leo then, the baby boomers really don't start to show up until around 45, 46, 47. Like that's when they're starting to be born. And they're really popping up like crazy, 48, 49. Like this is really the baby boom, right? And even into like the early 50s. So there is a period of Pluto and Leo that is early, but I wouldn't really call them boomers. It's like there's always this kind of like overlap generation. Like people born around 1965, 66 are kind of more Gen X-y than theoretically baby boomy, but that's a different story. Like if you get into like 1983, 1984, and even 85, there's this interesting interzone between Gen X and early millennials because Pluto moves into Scorpio in 1985, right? This always happens. There's always that little overlap generation that takes place. So that even happens with the silent generation. So even though they have maybe Pluto and Leo, which may retrograde back into Cancer, we're going to define them with Pluto in Cancer. Okay, that's going to be the definition here. So they're in their mid to late 80s or even beyond. Some of them are in their 90s, and they are still around, and they're pretty healthy breed because they didn't have any vaccines. This is a generation that if they had a vaccine, it might have been sometime in the 60s. Like I can attest to that because my mother, I think, had a, I think we all did. I think we all had this smallpox vaccine on sugar cubes, which was weird. I remember all three of us going to get, and I think that was the first and only vaccine that my mother and father had had. And I think I had the MMRs. I don't know. I didn't have that many. But this is a generation that did not have a lot of vaccine, hardly any, if at all. So that's why they're around, right? And cancer sticks around for a long time. Like cancer does not let go, right? That's like their calling card. So generationally, these people have been hanging on for a very long time. And a lot of them are still very active and they're involved in their churches. And most of them tend to be, not all of them, but most of them tend to be fairly conservative. And this Saturn in Aries, so the silent generation that is alive, most of them probably have Pluto somewhere at 20 degrees and up. Okay. So this Saturn square for those folks is not going to happen for about another 2 years. So they're right at the end of that, right? Now, some folks who are born in that early Pluto and Leo, they're going to have Saturn trining their Pluto, and they're going to have Neptune trining their Pluto. So the late silent generation, early boomer types are actually going to get a benefit from Saturn and Neptune. They're like, getting the second wind. And some of these people who have Pluto in Scorpio, I'm sorry, Cancer, they're going through their third Saturn return. And unfortunately, my mother didn't make it because a lot of them are also going through the Pluto opposition, right? And so this is very, very interesting time for this generation. So Saturn will square their Pluto, but again, the ones that are still alive, they're going to be kind of born like around 1936, 1937, 1938, right around there, maybe 1935. Saturn's coming in and squaring hard on their Pluto and also coming around for their third Saturn return. If they've made it through the Pluto opposition, I mean they could live, up through their 90s, right? Especially because this is a generation that hasn't had a lot of vaccinations. But it's also a very feisty generation. And you're going to see this with Saturn squaring their Pluto. Like they're not going to, go softly or into that long, dark night, right? This is a generation that will be kind of feisty till the very end. But Saturn is going to usher out their time. And again, some of the silent generation people with Pluto in Leo, they're going to initially get a bit of a benefit with the Neptune trine and the Saturn. It's like they're going to get a second wind. So, but I'm talking mainly about people that have Pluto and Cancer in their chart. So I think this, even if they have gone through the Pluto opposition, I don't think it's going to be easy for these folks. But they're really fighters. They had to get through being raised by Depression era parents. Think about that, right? They had to get their parents were Pluto and Taurus people. Think about that shit, right? Pluto and Gemini, gives birth to the baby boomers who give birth to Pluto in Libra, who give birth to Pluto in Sag. So you can see it goes air, fire, air, fire, right? This goes like earth, water, and then so I'm Pluto in Virgo, right? And so my parents had Pluto in Cancer, so they give birth to earth. And theoretically, if I was going to have a child, at the time that I was supposed to have a child, I would have been the father to a millennial, which has Pluto in Cancer, right? And then the millennials are giving birth to Pluto in Capricorn. So you see how it loops with earth and water and air and fire. So there's this intergenerational looping between the elements, right? So these people they were raised by people, Pluto and Taurus. Think about being raised by Pluto and fucking Taurus parents. Holy shit. Right? Those are parents who had a really, really difficult time. And a lot of those families lost their money, lost their fortunes, got cut off from their family finances, and like there's a downstream effect with that shit, right? So these were very tough people, Pluto and Cancer, right? Like their family lives, their roots, where they grew up, how they grew up, like that really tested intensely. And they all had a sense that they did not want to be poor. And so they worked their asses off to not be poor. It was sort of baked into them. And they're on their way out. And so Saturn in Aries is going to usher them out, but not without not without them going out with a bit of an attitude in a good way, right? Because they're tough people and they're fighters. Okay, let's get into our next generation here. And oh, what can we have here? The boomers. Okay, so the baby boomers are in their late 60s to early 80s. Okay. Now, I am going to define the boomers by Pluto and Leo. This is one generation. This is one Pluto aspect that, for me, like fits. Because at my age, right, I'm often lumped in with being a boomer, and I may be boomer adjacent, but I did not grow up in the 1950s. And the boomers did. They grew up in the 1950s. They came of age in the 1960s. If you were born in 1950, you were 16, right? You were 16 in 1966. Like, you were, your world was on fire, right? You were 16. By the time 1968 comes around, you're 18 years old. Like, you were peaking. You're peaking in the 60s. I'm fucking 8 years old. All right. It's like, yeah, I can watch the Vietnam War on TV. I'm living close to San Francisco. I can smell the flowers in the air, but that is not my time, right? I grew up in the 1970s. And by that time, the boomers are off. They're making money, right? Or they're coming home from the war or whatever. Like, they're not in high school. They're doing different things. They're selling, you know, drugs, importing drugs from, I don't know, Holland or Denmark or hashish or whatever, right? But I'm the kid that's smoking it. So, I'm not a boomer, but I'm not going to throw in my generation in here. So I'm just throwing this in here just so, and I'm not saying that to say, oh, by not being a boomer, I'm somehow like, I don't know, spiritually or morally clean. That's not what I'm referring to here. But so the boomers are in their late 60s to early 80s. They're defined by Pluto and Libra. Now, here's where it gets interesting for boomers, right? They also have Neptune and Libra. So when you combine Pluto and Leo, Neptune and Libra, I think that's why they did great art. Nobody can say that the boomers did not do great art. They did great art, great music, great movies, pretty good writers. I think they're better writers from other generations. when it came to music and movies, man, the boomers were top notch, right? And it's that Pluto and Leo, Neptune and Libra. It's really creative and it's really, really super artistic. And then they have Uranus in Cancer, which I always found to be interesting because there's something very rebellious about Uranus in Cancer against their home and where they grew up and their, their kind of roots, and they wanted to get out of the small towns and stuff like that. So what Saturn is going to do to the boomers is that, number one, it's going to come in and it's going to trine their natal Pluto. So they're going to become quite aware of time, right? And how much time they have in the clock. And initially, I think that this is going to be sort of this alarm clock that says, hey, we need to get every single last drop out of this life experience, right? So I see, and I can see this. However, Saturn, as it moves through this 3-year cycle in Aries, is going to start to square Neptune, their natal Neptune in Libra. And that is going to be a big square, right? And this is where we're going to, and I'm just being straight up here. This is where we're going to start to see some of the failing health of the boomer generation. And it's that Saturn Neptune square. And I think part of this has to do with the fact that a lot of boomers partied very hard, right? And put a lot of miles on their body. And it feels like Saturn is going to, and that Neptune square is going to catch up to them. And so on the one hand, we have the Saturn Pluto trine, and they're going to be like, okay, well, we got to get as much out of this as we can, right? But then I think some issues health-wise start to creep in. And the other thing I think that's going to happen with boomers is that because some of these health issues are going to start to take place, you're going to see some, if there's like a couple like in their 70s, and the man is still alive and the woman is still, but they're not together, okay, you're going to see those people come back together, right? You are going to see these, like if you're let's say you're a Gen X kid, okay, because these are your parents and your parents are still alive and they're divorced, and they've lived their lives. There are going to be some of you who are going to be shocked when you find out your parents have gotten back together again. It's like, and I don't know if they're going to try to make things good, because a lot of Gen X kids have some real antipathy towards their boomer parents, but I'm not sure that's really the cause of it, or that's not the that's not the operating principle here. The operating principle is that they don't want to be alone, right? They don't want to be alone at the end of their life journey. So you're gonna see this. You're gonna see these couples in their 70s, late 70s, mid late 70s, and they haven't been together for a while. They're gonna find each other again, and they're both gonna be single, and they're both gonna start to talk, and they're gonna make arrangements to hang out with each other. This is gonna happen. And it's going to be because of the Saturn, Neptune, and Libra square, and then that Saturn, Pluto trine, because these are a generation of romantics, right? They are romantics at heart, and that Saturn, Pluto trine is sort of like, the last sort of, glasses of wine at sunset, right? And I feel like this is, and I do feel like Saturn is going to be good for, even though it's debilitating with the Neptune square, it's going to be good for these people. I think it's going to, a lot of times, sometimes boomers get a bad rap, and sometimes they get what they deserve. I'm just, it is what it is, right? Like, it is what it is. But I do think that this Saturn Neptune square is going to humanize them in a lot of ways. Now, the Uranus square, that's going to be interesting because, of course, Saturn's going to square Uranus as well. And this is a generation that has had kind of radical beliefs. And it feels to me like a lot of their social liberalism is right here with Neptune and Libra and everything being fair, fair, right? And Uranus and Cancer, which is sort of like radical folkism. To me, Uranus and Cancer is kind of communistic in some ways. It's sort of like, well, let's look at the family structure in a new light, or let's look at community in a new light, right? So I feel like these are the two outer planets. And, some of them will have Uranus and Leo. Like if you're kind of in the 50s, you'll get some of that Uranus and Leo vibe. Maybe you get a little bit of, Uranus and Gemini, like Trump has, and but I feel like the bulk of the boomers have Uranus and Cancer. And that's where Saturn's really going to kick in. So it's also going to square and I feel like they could go either two ways here. That they'll either really double down on their political beliefs, which I think for the most part to this day are still pretty liberal, although a lot of boomers have sort of taken a hard turn to the right. Or it will force them to reconsider their beliefs, right? So, but I don't think that this is not a generation. Again, like Pluto and Cancer, they will hold on and be kind of irascible to the bitter end. Right? This generation will be rebellious to the end. And this is their last stand. Like Saturn in Aries brings with it, because once Saturn goes into Taurus 3 years out and starts to square their, the Pluto and Libra planets, people with Pluto and Leo and their Pluto, that's when things get very, very intense for this generation when they go through that. So the next 3 years, like I feel like you're going to see a very interesting side to this generation, and some of it may be a lot more compassionate and maybe more forgiving. Like if you have had issues with your boomer parents, your Gen Xer, you may find that they're going to be maybe a bit more, I don't know, apologetic or understanding. I wouldn't be surprised with that Saturn Neptune square in Libra, and but they're going to be rebellious to the end because that's just who they are, and but I feel like the next 3 years they're kind of like this is sort of they're revving up for their kind of last stand, and I think some of them are beginning to know this, right? So it's going to be very, very, because that Saturn in Aries and Saturn Pluto, they'll have some vitality. They'll feel like, yeah, let's take that motorcycle trip across the country, or whatever that is, right? Let's pretend we're, I'll be Peter Fonda, baby, you can be Dennis Hopper, but we'll just be on one bike. It'll be that sort of thing, and God bless them, because eventually they're going to go. It's already happening. We're witnessing every day now. Every week we watch. This week in deaths or whatever, and more of these, like this guy John McKeechan played a TV character named Tenafly. He was in a lot of Clint Eastwood movies. He was in a lot of Perry Mason shows. It's like, man, this motherfucker's dead now, and we're just going to see more and more and more. By the way, Clint Eastwood had his birthday yesterday. Clint Eastwood is not a boomer. He is not a boomer. Clint Eastwood is, I think he might have fucking Pluto and Gemini, if I'm not mistaken. Like, Clint Eastwood is old. So he's not a boomer. He's outlived a lot of boomers, though. All right. So for all you boomers out there, Saturn in Aries, boom on. Boom on. Boom while you can. Okay, let's talk about Gen X. All right, so Gen X is going to be in their early 40s, 42, 43, right around there to late 50s. Uh, Gen X is noted by having Pluto in Libra, Neptune in Sagittarius, and Uranus in Sag, Scorpio. You'll get both with the Gen X. Okay, so what do we get with Gen X? Oh, guess what? You get the Saturn Pluto square. Now, this is a really interesting square because your parents are baby boomers. And guess what is going to happen to your parents with Saturn in Aries? They're going to have a bit of a final run here. But again, even with that Saturn Neptune square, right, the boomers are going to start to experience failing health, which means Gen X, you are dealing with the death of your parents. You probably already have, probably already dealing with that. It's going to accelerate because that's just the nature of where we are in time and Saturn. But also, I feel like Gen X is one of these generations where I still feel like they're a bit of the sleeping giant. Okay. And the thing that's interesting about Gen X is that they are really the last link to the old world. You know, when Gen X was born, uh, they still had, you know, dial up or punch phones uh, in their home. Uh, let's see. So cable TV really starts coming online about 1980 in kind of a big way. It was happening somewhat in the late 70s, like maybe 77. Not every place had cable TV. But by 1980, 81, it's really starting to come online. And so Gen X has been around for a while, right? I mean, Pluto's about ready to go into Scorpio in about 3 years. But, um, that's why Gen X is like the last link to this old generation. So they're very interesting. They have this memory of what it's like to be in an analog world, but they're also very well versed in technology. So they're a facile, versatile generation. But it also feels like we're kind of stuck between the boomers and the millennials. And the boomers like just kind of hang on. I mean, like Donald Trump is an example of a boomer that does not go away. And I'm sure if I spent any significant amount of time, I could probably go through any number of people that would be like, oh yeah, there's that person and that person and that person and that person and that person. And they would all fit the profile that I'm talking about. And a lot of them are still in positions of power. By the way, Joe Biden is not a boomer. Joe Biden is a member of the lost generation. He's actually older than Donald Trump. Silent generation, not lost generation. So you have these Pluto and Leo people who are still very much holding on to these positions of power. But then you have the millennials who I feel like kind of leapfrog Gen X. Like the millennials have the how do I say this? They have the social justice tools that they have been taught in college, like critical theory and all the other programming that they were indoctrinated with. And they come out of college, and because they're such an extreme generation, we'll get to the millennials, they are inflamed, right? They're inflamed by social justice and injustice. And they're an extreme generation. And so they have sort of the polemic tools at their disposal to basically bum rush the corridors of power. right? And they're using things like race and sex and equality as the cudgels in order to sort of beat their way into positions of influence. And Gen X doesn't do that, right? You know, they're Pluto and Libra. And so what Gen X is trying to do is trying to balance, right? They're trying to balance everything. They're trying to, you know, balance the future and the past. Like they're that generation on the cusp. They're trying to balance like extreme attitudes with more, I would say, um, I wouldn't call it conservative, but I would say more tempered views, right? Which is what is inherent in Libra. So, and that's not to say that there aren't like SJWs that aren't Gen Xers. There are, but when I think of SJWs, to me, that is completely Pluto and Scorpio and Millennials. And so, because they had the indoctrination, because they had like the social catechism, because they had the social justice talking points, and they came in, they really came of age during a time like they're almost like synonymous with Obama, right? Like the millennials are really starting to come online when Obama is coming into power. And he's in power for 8 years. And during that time, the millennial social justice worldview is being embraced by a guy who stayed at the home of Bill fucking Ayers. Bill Ayers wrote Obama's book. So Obama is a social justice radical. And so what he's going to do is he's going to welcome this very young group of people into the political mix because they fit everything that he was schooled in, right? Like community organizing and leftism. Like that's where Obama comes from. No matter how connected he is in terms of like the CIA or that is his ideological background. And all these kids coming out of the schools that were taught basically by Bill Ayers and his wife and their comrades, those are the kids that move into like the Obama administration. And they've been around for a long time now. And by doing that, they kind of leapfrog Gen X because there's an agenda. And these are the, you know, they're the shock troops. The millennials are the shock troops of that agenda, not Gen X. So Gen X is in this really weird position where they're kind of overshadowed by these boomer powers that seem to be hanging on, that in many ways are also very reminiscent of their parents. And yet they've also been kind of eclipsed by these millennials who are very intense, right? But I feel like that this Saturn square to their Pluto is going to be really important for Gen Xers. And it's going to be like, okay, if not now, when? When do we step up? When do we take leadership positions? How do we sort of map out the rest of our time on this world? And by the way, a lot of Gen X kids have grown up. You know, a lot of Gen X kids are either very late in high school or they're in college or out of college, right? So their kids have flown the nest. So now they're also looking for meaning in their lives. And this Saturn Pluto square is going to coincide with the understanding that their kids are gone and their parents are dying, who are the baby boomers. And that's going to be a very sobering effect on Gen X. Now, some of them have Uranus and Sag, like the early Gen Xers have Uranus and Sag. So Saturn is going to start to trine their Uranus. And all of them have pretty much have Neptune and Sag. So Aries, Saturn is going to start to trine their Neptune. And I think that's where their spiritual maturation really comes into play. Like there's spirit, like there's a lot of like bullshit spiritual people out there. And I feel like Gen X has been through a lot of it, but they're also coming out the other side. And you're going to see like some very, very wise people start to emerge from the sort of like Tucker Carlson is Gen X. He's born in 1969, I believe. And he's got that Pluto Uranus conjunction in Virgo. And then what Neptune and I think Neptune and Scorpio. So he's already kind of gone through like I think Tucker Carlson's going to take off when Saturn goes into Taurus. That's a different story. He is a Taurus, but it feels to me like people like Tucker, it may be a little bit younger. So if you're in your mid to like a lot of Gen Xers are just starting to go through their Chiron return. I mean, think about that. Just starting to go through your Chiron return, which means you're in your early 50s or 50, and you've got an entire decade ahead of you. So it feels to me like Saturn is going to have a very sobering yet very potent effect on Gen X. And they don't have the same numbers as the millennials. There are more millennials than Gen X. They don't have the same numbers, but there is a wisdom that they have with Neptune and Sagittarius that I think is really going to start to come online with Saturn coming in and starting to trine it. And so I feel like what we'll see here over the next 3 years are some very interesting teachers coming out of the Gen X world. I don't necessarily see Gen X as being political, although I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But I do see them as being very spiritual. And when Saturn comes in and starts to trine Neptune along the way, sort of like wake. Now, Saturn's been here before, right? But it was here 30 years ago. So, for a lot of the Gen Xers, they're in their late 20s, really weren't quite ready for it, right? Some of them were even younger than that. But now they're at a point where Saturn takes on a different role, right? It takes on that role where they're sort of in their early to mid late 50s and they're ready for it, right? So I think over the next 3 years, we're going to start to see some very interesting spiritual teachers come out of this Saturn transit. And I think, again, for a lot of Gen X people, their parents have a huge, huge shadow over their life. And they're going to start to see their parents leave the planet. And this is going to, I think, accelerate and facilitate a lot of this kind of spiritual leadership quality that Saturn is going to bring to Neptune. Of course, that Saturn is going to oppose Pluto in their chart. It's not going to square Pluto. It's going to oppose Pluto in their chart. So that it's like that's an activation. They're being called in some ways to act. It's like, okay, it's like very parental. It's like, if I don't do this, who is going to do it? Right. So again, that leads into this whole thing with their parents, but it goes beyond that as well. So Gen X, you're going to have a very interesting ride, and get ready because a lot of you are going to bloom. It will be a bittersweet bloom, but you're going to bloom, and your wisdom will be greatly appreciated. Okay, let's talk about the millennials. Let's talk about the millennials. They're next in line. Okay. So the millennials are going to be like very late 20s to early 40s. There's that overlap, right? There's that kind of Venn diagram between sort of the early millennials and the late Gen Xers. They're noted by having Pluto in Scorpio, obviously, which we've talked about, Neptune in Capricorn, and mostly Uranus in Capricorn. Some do have Uranus in Sag, and some have very late, super late Uranus in Aquarius, but mostly Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn. Okay, so this is going to be a very interesting transit because Saturn will set up an inconjunct with Pluto in their chart at various degrees along the way, right? Because Aries and Scorpio are in inconjunct mode. So that's going to be a very interesting impact on their Pluto. And, inconjuncts are fascinating, right? It's like this program that's kind of going on in the back of your head. And you know that you have to do something with it, but you're not quite sure what to do. Right. So this is what's going to happen with the millennials. And I mean, I think that these millennials are very intense, right? They're very extreme, and it can go really either way with the inconjunct part. We're going to get into the Saturn and Uranus part, right? That part is going to be very tricky. But the inconjunct with Pluto could be something along the lines of having a major wake up call, right? Like a major, major wake up call. And the way that you work with an inconjunct is that you have this thing that you feel like you need to do or experience or accomplish. But the only way that you can do it is if you intuitively move towards it step by step by step. And that's why when you see an inconjunct in a chart, it looks like a broken line, because that's what that is. And so there's something here about power, right? Like millennials are very into power, and as a generation, they're the first generation that I believe is collective. When you move into Scorpio, you're into the collective space. And that is why, as a generation, they tend to have had these social movements that have been really associated with them, like very, very intensely, because that's the nature of Pluto and Scorpio. I mean, every generation from here on out is collective, whether it's Gen Z or Gen Alpha, right? They're all in that collective. But Scorpio is that place where we literally drop off into the trough of the collective, right? Into that deep void. So it'll be interesting to see how this Saturn opposition impacts them as the Saturn inconjunct impacts them as a generation, and what they do with that, right? It could force some of them to, like, go ballistic. They could go ballistic, or it could force some of them to take responsibility on an individual level for the world that they want to build. And that's why I have these two phrases down here: burn it down, or build it up, or build it your own way, or build it your own. And to me, that's where the inconjunct comes into play. It can go really either way, right? Because there's this thing that is hitting them in a way that they can't really consciously understand, and they have to instinctively move towards it. And at the same time, Saturn's going to be squaring Neptune and squaring Uranus in Aries. And the Saturn Neptune square, that gets back into this, the Neptune square that the boomers have, but it's different, right? Because boomers have it in Libra. These guys have it in Capricorn. And Capricorn's about institutions. And it feels like, I'm just going to go from a political perspective, that you have people like AOC and Pete Buttigieg, like the Democrats are trying to find their center again. They're trying to figure out how to bring men back into the party. And it feels like this Saturn Neptune square in Capricorn is kind of part of that story. Like the the Democratic leadership looked at the millennials and said, "This is our future. Like they are going to be politically correct social justice warriors, and we are going to bring women, minorities, the trans, these are going to be our new political leaders." Literally, we're setting all of that up, right? And they believed that with 8 years of Obama and 4 theoretically bad years of Trump, that they could recapture that, and that would be sort of their political phalanx moving forward. And it has been a disaster, right? Because they went all in. I mean, for 8 years of Obama, remember those millennials started to show up in the Obama White House, and they started to show up like AOC and Ilhan Omar. Those are all millennials, so they're starting to show up, right? And they're going all in, and they're thinking that they have control of the media, they have control of sort of the political machine in DC, right? They have control in some ways over commercials, advertising. They have it all lined up, and all they have to do is just keep force feeding Americans this version of like the new Democratic Party, but it doesn't work. Like, and so now there's a major like void in that world. And the millennials are in that world, right? They're the ones that were empowered in a lot of ways by the establishment to carry on this tradition, but it doesn't really work. And the reason it works is because it's too rooted in the politics of ideology and kind of grievance, right? And everybody gets tired of it. Everybody gets just there's this fatigue that sets in. And so some millennials who have kind of were part of that, bought into that. This Saturn transit through Aries, squaring their Neptune is not going to be easy for them, right? They're going to have to kind of reevaluate sort of their role in society, and because they're starting to get older. Like the oldest millennials they're like what 40 years old now, right? They're no longer sort of the new kid on the block, right? So they're trying to figure out kind of where their place is in the world again, now that in some ways this ideology that they were being groomed for got hollowed out. And then, of course, Saturn is going to square Uranus in Capricorn as well for them. And that's kind of rebellious. It's rebellious against whatever, so it would be interesting because perhaps some of these millennials will realize that they were fucked with and played, and but it doesn't mean that they want to put on a MAGA cap either, right? Because I think millennials are kind of like that. They don't roll that way. They'll try to find their own path or their own way. But I do think that this could be a very good time for them. It feels like the first signs of aging are coming on, especially with that Saturn Neptune square. And I think they're really starting to think about their future and like the future of their children, who, by the way, are Gen A. So they're starting to think about some of these things. And it feels like some of them are going to have some pretty significant wake-up calls. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but a lot of the Gen A kids got put through a lot of the sex transition stuff, right? Because they're the ones that are the children of the millennials. And I think what's going to happen with this Saturn and Aries and even the Neptune square, Neptune Uranus square, but Saturn. I think some of these parents are going to wake up to the fact that they made a huge error in deciding the sex of their children and convincing their child and having the medical industry convince them. This is not going to go well for some of these millennial parents with the Saturn square and the Saturn square Neptune, Saturn square. I think you're going to see some of them, not all of them, but some of them that participate in that begin to break down. Because when I get to Gen A, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So I would say that the millennials are in a bit of a crisis here with this 3-year transit of Saturn. But if they go about it and face some of this stuff and figure out that, and I've always said this about millennials, if they can figure out how to take responsibility and create and build the world that they reject or rebel against, that is their greatest gift and superpower. When they do that, they can really, build transformative structures and businesses and even communities. So I don't think that this is a complete lost cause at all for them. But this is going to be a big period for millennials, and they're going to be certainly going to be tested. But at the end of the day, like, they're going to be going through that same sort of, when Saturn goes into Taurus, they're going to go through that same opposition that Gen X is going through, but it's also going to be trining Uranus and trining Neptune in their chart. And so the big moment for the millennials is going to be that Saturn Taurus ingress. And I feel like with Saturn and Aries, like, some of this is going to be breaking down for them. And, there's this idea that, you break down and you build up. That's how you build muscle, right? So, okay, let's talk about Gen Z and where they're at. Okay, Gen Z, late teens, late 20s, Pluto in Sag, Neptune in Aqua, Uranus in Aqua, Pisces. Saturn in Aries is them beginning to flex their muscles. Okay, we got super trines and sextiles. So if we look at Saturn in Aries, what's it going to do? It's going to start to trine Pluto in the charts of Gen Z. This is going to be very interesting. I think Gen Z is an interesting generation. I think they're all interesting. I think the millennials are interesting too. Don't get me wrong. I think they're all interesting. But Gen Z to me is really interesting because they got Pluto and Sag. So this is a generation that is very philosophical, right? I had Dr. Longo on for 3 hours last night or last week. He's a total Pluto and Sag. In fact, the sun is conjunct Pluto and Sag. And in some ways, he's sort of emblematic and archetypal of Gen Z. It's a very, very philosophical generation. They're very into astrology. They're into, like, a lot of interesting shit. And they're also pretty based, but they're also not, they're conservative, but they're not going to go along with the program either. So they're a very interesting generation. So Saturn trining Pluto is like them finding some ground, right? Like, okay, I can build on this. I can build on this. Of course, Longo and his brother have a publishing company, which is great for, Pluto and Sag. So I really feel like over the next 3 years, we're going to see a maturation level with Gen Z. It's going to be very, very interesting. And so what Saturn's going to do is it's going to sextile their Neptune. And for those that were born from 1996 to what about 2003, right? Saturn is also going to sextile Uranus in their chart. Plus, they're going to have transiting Uranus, right, beginning to transiting Uranus going to oppose their natal Pluto, but at the same time, it will trine their natal Uranus and also their natal Neptune. Like, this is a generation that is going to be lit up like a freaking neon sign. And I feel like we're going to see them grow up. right? Like we're going to start to see more Gen Z kids get married. Like I feel like a lot of the trad wife experience is going to come through the Gen Z world. It already is. It's already happening. Some of it is going to be religiously related because when you get Pluto and Sag, you get some dogma, right? You're going to get some people in that generation who will, like they'll be really be into astrology, and guess what? They'll just reject astrology, and they're like, screw astrology. I'm a born again Christian now. Like you will see that with Pluto and Sag. I guarantee you. Some of the people who've been kind of hardcore Christians, they'll reject that, and they'll say, "Man, that was a noose around my neck. What's been going on with this astrology stuff?" Right? Like, especially when Gemini goes into that opposition with Pluto, you're going to see a lot of Gen Z start to flip. And I talked about the polypods a little bit on Friday with Danny Katz. If you haven't seen that show, check it out. I do feel like this is a generation because they do have Uranus in Aquarius and Neptune in Aquarius, and now Pluto is in Aquarius. That this is a generation that might be a bit more open to that kind of experimentation as well. Although I think Gen Z's, the millennials have already gone. I think Aubrey Marcus is a millennial, right? So I think they've already gone there first. But I could see maybe Gen Z kind of moving into that territory, but they would try to probably make it legal, right? Like, hey, let's all become Mormons and let's all reform the Mormon church so that we can have multiple wives. Like I can see Gen Z doing shit like that because they're in some ways they're religious reformers, they're philosophical reformers. So this Saturn transit is going to be really, really good for them for the next 3 years. And we're going to see a lot of them, start to really come online. Some of them are going through their Saturn returns now, right? Like, so we're going to see them grow up right before our very eyes. And a lot of them are going to get married, and they're going to start having, kids and families. And I've always felt, and I still believe that they are going to be trying to return to a more conventional lifestyle, right? Because the millennials took things way, way out, right? And so generations tend to kind of boomerang off each other. So I feel like Saturn in Aries is going to be really, really good for Gen Z. And we're going to start to see a lot of their kind of philosophical brilliance really start to come on. I do feel like we are going to see some philosophical giants come out of Gen Z. I am absolutely utterly convinced of that. Like 3-4 generations down the line, there are going to be people that'll be talked about that'll come out of Gen Z, and that their ideas and their philosophies and even their ideas on culture at large will shape the future. I'm totally convinced of this. And a lot of people think Gen Z are just purple hair and TikTok. Trust me, they're a much, much deeper generation than that. And you're going to start to see them really come online here with this Saturn transit. Okay, we got one more to go, and then we're done. And that is Gen A. And Gen A is just starting to get our attention, right? So Gen Alpha, they are like 1 to 15. Like 15 is about as old right now for Gen Alpha. Pluto in Capricorn. That's when they're born, Pluto in Capricorn. They have Uranus in Aries / Pisces. And then, actually, well, Uranus and Pisces. It'd be Uranus and Pisces, then Aries. We got them backwards a little bit there. But most of them have Uranus in Aries. And then Neptune in Pisces. Pluto in Capricorn. But they do share some of these. Just invert those. Okay, now this is a very interesting generation. They're very old souls, right? So what's Saturn going to do? It's going to square their natal Pluto, and they are going to grow up very fast. Very fast. And the term that I have here is coming of age hard. And part of this has to do with the fact there is a group of them that are born with Saturn in Libra, Uranus in Aries, and Pluto in Capricorn, right? And that generation is that little slice of the generation is going to have Saturn in Aries squaring their Uranus, opposing their Saturn. So it's like they're 14, 15 years old. Like these are right now. These are the kids now, right? And then squaring Pluto. These kids aren't happy. Like they are not happy kids. These are the kids that were forced to go through the lockdowns with COVID, and they're not happy. And I guarantee you, they have not forgotten that a lot of their youth was snatched from them, and they were forced to wear masks, and they couldn't go out and bond with their friends. Like this is going to start to really pop up here with Saturn going into Aries and hitting that particular group. Right now, I think that this is a very powerful generation, and I've said this before. It almost feels like they were targeted, right? Like the elites looked at this generation coming in because we know that they use astrology. They see this generation coming in, Pluto and Capricorn. These kids, they're going to run the fucking show. They are going to run the show, and they are going to run the show sooner than everybody thinks. Right? You're going to see these, and so there. I believe that there was an attempt to really set them back in a very big way because they're the ones that have to deal with COVID and their children, right? And they're having to deal with all the paranoia that are coming through their parents or the friends of their parents. And they can't understand why they can't go see their grandparents, right? These are these kids. And it has like hit them hard. They're also the kids that have been told that they're not boys or they're not girls. And guess what? We can help you become the inner you that isn't you. And I think that is all by design, by the way, to really fuck with this generation because they are powerful. This is the generation that will take on the elite power structures, and they will do it at a very early age. We're talking 20s, right? They are a threat ultimately to the global hegemony. I'm convinced of that. So Saturn coming in is going to hit them hard, right? It's going to square their Pluto. It's going to square that Uranus. All those Uranus 7 years in Aries, right? 7 years, and it is going to hit. It's going to hit. It's going to hit them hard. It's going to hit them hard. So you're going to see them grow up hard. You're going to see them grow up fast. You're going to see them grow up a little bit angry here, right? Over the next 3 years, this is a generation that is literally going to demand a seat at the table. And if you're a millennial parent and you held your kid down and you basically spread your paranoia into their lives, get ready because you are going to have a handful. You're going to be dealing with because they're just starting to go through this Saturn opposition, right? And what happens with Saturn opposition? You separate from your dominant culture and you become rebellious. And wait till these kids get into their rebellion stage. It is not going to be pretty for the people that were essentially, I'm just going to use the word targeting them, right? So they're and again, they're going to grow up hard, they're going to grow up fast, and the Saturn transit is really going to accelerate, right? Because Saturn is going to conjunct, right? It's going to conjunct that Uranus in Aries. Think about that. Just think about that for a minute, right? It's going to square Pluto and it's going to conjunct their Uranus in Aries. And that's an acceleration moment. It's more than just being rebellious. Oh, that's more than being rebellious. That's being uh, calculated, very, very calculated. And I can see this generation absolutely beginning to dominate the internet. Absolutely dominating the internet with that Saturn Uranus conjunction. Okay, so there you go. There's our little walk through the generations and how Saturn and Aries is going to impact them. I hope you found it interesting, useful, informative. If you did, hit the like, hit subscribe if you want to keep getting notified about these shows. And that'll do it for today. I'm going to have a new website June 11th. That means the old prices are going up. So if you want a reading, the old prices, and get them while you can, kids. And by the way, when you get a reading on my website, please, please, please watch the video. It tells you how to get in touch with me. It tells you how to get in touch with me. There's an email address. There's a phone number there. I have a crawl. Shows it right at the bottom. Right. So if you do that, please follow those instructions, and I will return your query very quickly. All right. Thank you all for being here. You know the drill. Take good care of yourselves. Treat each other well. God bless. Love you all. Robert Phoenix signing off, and bye for now.